Hi, dude. Tonight we're going to start with Chapter 6 of Peter Pan. I hope you're all tucked in and comfy and ready for bed. So rest a little bit as we read this chapter. How they grew to love their home under the ground, especially Wendy. It consisted of one large room with a floor in which you could dig, and this floor grew stout mushrooms which were used as stools. A never tree tried hard to grow in the center of the room, but every morning the boys sawed the trunk through level with the floor. By evening it was always about 2 feet high, and they would put a board on top of it, and thus becoming a table. As soon as the meal was cleared away, they sawed off the trunk again, and thus there was more room to play. There was an enormous fireplace, and across this Wendy stretched strings from which she suspended her washing. The bed was tilted against the wall by day and let down at 6:30, when it filled nearly half the room, and all the boys except Michael slept in it. Wendy must have a baby, so Michael, being the littlest, was hung up in a basket. There was one recess in the wall, no larger than a bird cage, which was the private apartment of Tinkerbell. It could be shut off from the rest of the home by a tiny curtain. It was all especially entrancing to Wendy because those rampageous boys of hers gave her so much to do. The cooking kept her nose to the pot, and there were whole weeks when she was never above ground except an occasional evening when she did her mending. Wendy's favorite time for sewing and darning was after the boys had all gone to bed. As time wore on, did Wendy think much of the beloved parents that she had left behind her? Perhaps, but she did not really worry about them. She was sure they would always keep the window open for her to fly back. What did disturb her at times was that John remembered his parents only vaguely, as people he had once known, and Michael was quite willing to believe that she was really his mother. These things scared her a little, and she tried to keep them remembering the old life. When Peter was home, he would help Wendy manage the children, but he never was really happy about pretending to be their father. Once he asked anxiously, "Is it only make-believe, isn't it? It would make me seem old to be their father. I'm not really Wendy." "Not if you don't wish it," Wendy answered him. Then she asked firmly, "Peter, what are your exact feelings towards me?" "Those of a devoted son, Wendy." "I thought so," she said, and went and sat by herself at the extreme end of the room. "You are so queer," Peter said, puzzled. Then came the evening which though none of them knew it, was to be the last in their underground home. The day had been almost uneventful, and now the children were having their evening meal. Above, the Indians were on guard. Tiger Lily, their beautiful princess, had once been saved by Peter from a dreadful fate at the hands of the pirates. Ever since, there was nothing she and her braves would not do for him. All night they would sit keeping watch over the home underground, awaiting the attack by the pirates that was sure to come. The children were playing noisily, so when Wendy heard Peter's step above, "Children, I can hear your father's steps," she said. "He likes you to meet him at the door." Now when they heard the Indians greet Peter, "Watch well, braves," Peter said, as he passed and began his descent through the tree. Then, as so often before, the gay children rushed to drag Peter in, and so often before, but never again. Now it was time for Wendy's good-night story, the story they loved best, the story Peter hated. Usually when she began to tell this story, he left the room, but tonight he remained on his stool. And that was a short chapter, so we'll go ahead and read Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Wendy's Story. "Listen then," said Wendy, settling down to her story, with Michael at her feet and 7 boys in the bed. "There was once a gentleman." "I had rather he had been a lady," Curly said. Quiet, their mother scolded. There was a lady also. The gentleman's name was Mr. Darling, and her name was Mrs. Darling. I knew them, John said, to annoy the others. I think I knew them, Michael said rather doubtfully. They were married, Wendy went on. And what do you think they had? White rats, cried Nims. No, they had 3 children, said Wendy. Now these 3 children had a faithful nurse called Nana, but Mr. Darling was angry with her and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away. They flew away to Neverland, where the lost children are. Oh, Wendy, cried Toodles, that was one of the lost children. Was one of the lost children called Toodles? Hush. Now I want you to consider the feelings of the unhappy parents with all of their children flown away. Think of the empty beds. I don't see how it can have a happy ending, said the second twin. Have no fear, said Wendy. She had now come to the part that Peter hated. You see, she went on, the children knew that the mother would always leave the window open for them to fly back by. So they stayed away for years and had a lovely time. And when they were quite grown up, they went back. And there was the window still standing open. So they flew to their mummy and daddy, and pen cannot describe the happy scene. When Wendy had finished, Peter uttered a hollow groan. What is it, Peter? She cried, running to him. Wendy, you were wrong about mothers. And now he told her what he had hitherto concealed. Long ago, he said, I thought like you that my mother would always keep that window open for me. So I stayed away for moons and moons and moons and then flew back. But the window was barred, and there was another little boy sleeping in my bed. Wendy, let us go home, cried John and Michael together. Yes, she said, clutching them. Not tonight, asked the boys, bewildered. At once, said Wendy resolutely. Peter, will you make the necessary arrangements? If you wish it, he replied coolly. If she did not mind the parting, he was going to show her that neither did he. But of course he cared very much and was full of wrath against grown-ups, who as usual were spoiling everything. Tinkerbell will take you across the sea, he said in a short, sharp voice. Wake her, Nibs. Now Wendy saw that the boys were gazing very forlornly at her, and her heart melted. Dear ones, she said, if you will all come home with me, I feel almost sure I can get my father and mother to adopt you. The boys jumped for joy. Peter, can we go? They all cried. All right, Peter replied with a bitter smile, and immediately they rushed to get their things. And now, Peter, Wendy said, thinking he had put everything right, I'm going to give you your medicine before you go. But then she saw the look on Peter's face that made her heart sink. I'm not going with you, Wendy, he said. To find your mother, she coaxed. No, he told Wendy. Perhaps she would say that I was old and that I just want to always be little boy and have fun. And so the others had to be told Peter isn't coming. Peter not coming? They gazed blankly at him, their sticks over their backs, and on each stick a bundle. Now then, cried Peter, no fuss, no blubbering, goodbye, Wendy. And he held out his hand cheerily. She had to take his hand, as there was no indication he would prefer a thimble. You will remember to take your medicine, Peter. Yes. That seemed to be everything, and an awkward pause followed. Peter, however, was not the kind that breaks down before people. Are you ready, Tinkerbell? He called out. Aye, aye. Then lead the way. Tink darted to the nearest tree, but no one followed her, for it was at this moment that the pirates had made their dreadful attack upon the Indians. Above there had been All had been so still that the air was rent with shrieks and the clash of steel. Below there was a dead silence. Peter seized his sword, and the lust of the battle was in his eye. And that's the end of chapter 7. Tomorrow we'll pick the battle up. But for tonight, get some rest. Know how much I love you. Make tomorrow better than today, and every tomorrow after that. I love you, dude. Good night. Hi, dude. Tonight we're going to start with chapter 8 of Peter Pan. They were all set in chapter 7 to say goodbye. Wendy and Michael and John had decided they wanted to go home. And the Lost Boys decided that they wanted to go with them so that maybe Wendy's family would adopt them as well. But Peter was angry and he didn't want to go. But right before they were to take off, the battle began. For Hook and the pirates had decided to attack the Indians, which in turn would lead to them attacking Peter and the Lost Boys. So let's start chapter 8. The pirate attack had taken the Indians by surprise. Around the brave Tiger Lily were a dozen of her stoutest warriors. Suddenly, without warning, they saw the pirates bearing down on them, and they seized their weapons. The air was torn with the war cry, but it was too late. Many were slain, and only Tiger Lily and a small remnant of her tribe escaped through the dark woods. But for the victorious Hook, the night's work was not over. It was not the Indians he had come to destroy. It was Peter Pan he wanted, Peter and Wendy and their band, but chiefly Peter. In the meantime, the boys waited below to know their fate. Which side had won? The pirates, listening at the mouths of the trees, heard their question put by every boy, and alas, they also heard Peter's answer. If the Indians had won, he said, they will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now Smee had found the tom-tom and was at that moment sitting on it. To his amazement, Hook signed him to beat the tom-tom, and slowly there came to Smee an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the order. Twice Smee beat upon the instrument, and then stopped to listen. The tom-tom, the pirates heard Peter cry, "An Indian victory!" The children answered with a cheer. There was music to the black hearts above. They repeated their goodbyes to Peter. Rapidly and silently, Hook gave his orders, one man to each tree, and the others to arrange themselves in a line 2 yards apart. The first to emerge from his tree was Curly. He rose out of it into the arms of one of the pirates, who flung him to another and then another, and so he was tossed from one to another until he fell at the feet of the black pirate. All of the boys were plucked and tossed in this ruthless manner, like bales of goods being flung from hand to hand. A different treatment was accorded to Wendy, who came last. With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her, and offering his arm, escorted her to the spot where the others were being gagged and tied to prevent their flying away. Hook now signed to his men that the captives were to be taken to the ship. The little house was to be used as a conveyance. The children were flung into it. 4 stout pirates raised it on their shoulders. The others fell in behind, and singing their hateful pirate chorus, the strange procession set off through the woods. Now Hook was alone. He tiptoed across to one of the trees. Intently he listened for any sound below. Was Peter asleep, or did he stand waiting at the foot of the tree with his dagger in his hand? There was no way of knowing what was going down. Hook was a brave man, but for a moment he had to stop and wipe his brow, which was dripping like a candle. Then he silently let himself go down into the unknown. He arrived at the foot of the shaft, and as his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, the only thing which his greedy gaze rested, long sought for and found at last, it was the great bed. And on that bed lay Peter fast asleep. Unaware of the tragedies being enacted above, Peter had, after the children left, played gaily on his pipes to prove himself that he did not care. Then he decided not to take his medicine so as to grieve Wendy. Then he lay down on the bed. He nearly cried, but it struck him how indignant Wendy would be if he laughed instead. So he laughed a hearty laugh and fell asleep in the middle of it. Thus defenseless, Hook found him. He stood silent at the foot of the tree, looking through the small opening. There across the chamber was his enemy. He made a stealthy step, but found the way blocked by a low door in the tree. Feeling for the catch, he found, to his fury, that it was beyond his reach. Was his enemy to escape him after all? But what was that? The red in his eye caught sight of Peter's medicine standing on a ledge within easy reach. Immediately he knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful poison, blended by himself. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's medicine. Then one long gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning wormed his way up the tree. Now muttering strangely to himself, he stole away through the woods. Peter slept on. It must have been not less than 10 o'clock by the crocodile when he suddenly sat up in bed, awakened by a soft tapping on the door of his tree. Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it, and then he spoke. "Who is that?" "Let me in, Peter." It was Tink, and quickly he unbarred the door. She flew in excitedly, her face flushed and her dress stained with mud. "What is it? Out with it!" Peter shouted, and she told him about the capture of Wendy and the boys. "Wendy bound, and on that pirate ship, I'll rescue her," Peter cried, leaping at his weapons. He thought of something he could do to please her. He thought he would take his medicine. His hand closed on that faithful drop. "No!" shrieked Tinkerbell, who had heard Hook muttering about his deed, and as he sped fast through the forest. "It is poisoned." "Poisoned? Who could have poisoned it?" Peter asked. "Hook," replied Tinkerbell. "Don't be silly. How could have Hook gotten down here? Besides, I never fell asleep." And Peter really believed this. He raised the cup. Tink knew there was no time for words now. It was time for deeds. And with one of her lightning movements, she got between Peter's lips and the draught and drained it to the dregs. "It was poisoned, Peter," she told him softly. "And now I'm going to die." "Oh, Tink, did you drink it to save me?" "Yes." Already she was reeling in the air. Her wings could hardly carry her now. She lighted on Peter's shoulder and gave his chin a loving bite. Then, tottering to her chamber, she lay down on the bed. Peter knelt beside her in distress. Every moment her light was growing fainter, and he knew that if it went out, she would be no more. Her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said. Then he made it out. She was saying that she thought she could get well again if children believed in fairies. Peter flung out his arms. There were no children there. It was nighttime. But he called to all the boys and girls who might be dreaming of Neverland. "Do you believe me?" he cried. Tink sat up in bed to listen to her fate. "If you believe," Peter shouted, "clap your hands. Don't let Tink die." Many clapped. Then the clapping stopped suddenly, as if countless mothers had rushed to their nurseries to see what on earth was happening. But already Tink was saved. First, her voice grew strong. Then she popped out of bed and was flashing through the room. "And now to rescue Wendy," said Peter. The moon was riding in a cloudy heaven when Peter rose from his tree, his weapon strapped to his side, to set out on his perilous quest. As he pressed through the silent forest, he swore this terrible oath. "Hook or me this time." And that's the end of Chapter 8. Rest well tonight, dude. Get some rest. Know I love you. Make tomorrow better than today and every tomorrow after that. I love you, dude. Good night.